sip of Coca-Cola.
Healthy sip, especially.
Mm.
Sometimes I miss it. Sometimes I'm like, I should get a Coke, but then I never
Disgusting. It is the most horrible thing I've ever tasted, but I still drink it because it's like £3 with a meal deal, and I live on meal deals and bolognese now. That's all I eat.
Oh, nice. Hello, everyone. This is By Adaptation, Clapper's book club, monthly book club, where we talk about old releases, new releases, books, films, adaptations, and I am your host, Nicolo Grasso, and I'm joined, as always, by the good Ewan Gledo. How are you, Ewan?
I'm all right, tired as usual, but that's no change anymore, is it? How are you?
I'm holding all right. I'm excited to talk about those two books. And it's fun because I've been looking at, like, we talk about this every week. Like, why did we pick those two books? This is probably the most logical combo we've had because, you know, Denis Villeneuve's Dune is coming out in the US and it's come out in most of Europe and Asia as well. And it's a horror film. It's a horror book, and it's Halloween. It's the month of spooks, and why not choose a Stephen King joint for that?
Can I just say, I hate Halloween. I don't like autumn. And me reading a 1,200-page book on top of Dune in the same month was just, it killed my brain.
It is the quick and easy read episode, you know, just those books, you pick them up and you're just done with it. Like, there was brisk pacing, you know.
It's like a book you'd take on the train just to read in a half hour.
Jesus, I wish. I'm doing that for next month's episode right now. I'm reading the book on the train, which is kind of good because it makes the train ride less painful. Because it's like I read 15 pages and I'm just there already. I'm like, I wish it were longer. This makes the reading more pleasant.
I commute to work and I wish I had time to read on the trains, but you get really dirty looks from people if you're reading on the train. So it's like the public shame of literature is not quite rescinded from Europe just yet.
I get the opposite
especially
here.
Not England.
Yeah, I try to watch movies sometimes on my tablet because I'm like, I don't have time to watch movies otherwise right now, so I'm trying to watch them on the train. But it's always like I always get the weirdest people that will sit next to me, so I feel uncomfortable watching a movie. I was watching the Netflix film "There's Someone Inside Your House," where people just get stabbed violently in the head. And just an elderly lady sat next to me. She was like, "Can I sit here, darling?" I was like, yeah, just closed the tab. I was like, I'm listening to a podcast now.
Oh, God. I think I listened to 20 minutes of a Conan O'Brien podcast before the train announcement said I was delayed by half an hour. Oh. And then I watched a Noel McDonald podcast episode on Netflix, and I didn't realize downloading that used up all of my data. So I had a good 1 day's commute to work.
That's it for the date of the month. Anyway, let us start by talking about Stephen King's It.
I'm not supposed to take stuff from strangers.
Oh, well, I'm Pennywise the dancing clown. Pennywise? Yes, meet Georgie. Georgie, meet Pennywise. Now we aren't strangers, are we?
What are you doing in the sewer?
The storm blew me away. Blew the whole circus away. Can you smell the circus, Georgie? There's peanuts, cotton candy, hot dogs, and...
Popcorn?
Popcorn! Is that your favorite?
Uh-huh.
Mine too! Because they pop. Pop, 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 pop. Pop, pop, pop.
I should get going now.
Oh. Without your bow? You don't want to lose it, Georgie. Bill's gonna kill you. Here. Take it.
I hate to think that this is Andy Muschietti's first experience as a director with It Chapter 2. But, oh boy.
Oh man.
Boy, oh boy.
Oh boy. Well, It, the novel, came out in 1986. It was the 22nd book that Stephen King wrote, 17th under his own name. People like trivia like that. And it's one of his longest books. Written in the 80s, it has every trope that you know about the man. It's a story that jumps back and forth in time. It is set both in the 80s and in the 50s. It follows a group of young kids at first who then become adults. They live in the town of Derry, and it's being tormented by an evil creature, a shape-shifting creature. It was only called, was usually takes the figure of a clown called Pennywise, the dancing clown, an iconic character in Stephen King's canon. And it's not an easy read. It's not a quick read. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of pages about exploring this town in the 50s, exploring it in the 80s, following this group of characters as they've grown through time, as they are bullied by others, as they have encounters with Pennywise and its different forms, how they try to fight him off as children and as adults. And it's a lot. And Stephen King himself said that he was on coke while writing some of this book. And you can tell because there are just sequences where you go like, Jesus, why are you focusing so much on this description of this dairy or whatever, just this road? And it just keeps going and going. They're like, when is this going to end? It's like a 70-page chapter. So, you know, the man had a lot of energy in him while writing this. So bless him. And this was already adapted once in 1990 as a 2-part TV miniseries. And I don't know if you've seen it, Ewan. Have you seen it?
One of the many DVDs I own but haven't seen. The only experience I have with it is when I used to watch the Nostalgia Critic, I watched his review of it.
Oh, jeez.
And all I remember is the scene of Tim Curry laughing. That's the one.
That's the one.
Which, I mean, Tim Curry is just an absolutely adorable person. He's a fantastic actor. So I imagine it'll be quite interesting. It'll be far better than the adaptations we got in modern times.
Well, let's just say the movie, those two movies shine when Tim Curry's on screen. Too bad he's barely on screen. Like if you've seen a couple clips of him, those are all the clips pretty much of him.
God.
In the film. And I remember being quite scared of this because I was like at some cousin's house and they were watching it on TV. I was kind of like, oh, it's a clown. What is that about? And it was just scarred by him with the grinning teeth. But, you know, to be very short about it, it's very bland. It's a TV movie. Like Stephen King has had a lot of those because he was disappointed with adaptations of some of his work. Like, well, most famously The Shining and others. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. And so
every time he took matters into his own hands, it was shit.
Oh, Maximum Overdrive.
Oh, God. The Shining miniseries that I think he either produced or was part of as a director or something.
He wrote it as well, I think.
He wrote it, yeah. That was on Amazon Prime about a year ago, and I remember watching it and thinking, he's failed to adapt something he himself wrote. And it's like... That can be the one credit I give to the films. It is at least an adaptation of the book. It's not a good one, but it is an adaptation of the book.
Well, it sure is. Because like Tim Curry was properly iconic with his performance as Pennywise, but you know, the rest of it just sucks. And Warner Brothers decided to reboot it, remake it. And it's interesting that we're going to be talking about Dune. We're talking about the David Lynch version, not the Villeneuve one. But I think what they did with adapting it is much better than what they did with adapting the new Dune. Because they just looked at this gargantuan novel and said, what do people actually like about this? I like the kids part, you know, that's the nostalgia, that's the fun part. You can have the bullying and the humor and all of that with Richie Tozier. So like, you know what? Let's just make one movie. Let's call it It. 2 hours and 10 minutes long. And it's just about the kids. Boom. Get the director of Mama involved. Get a lot of other people. I believe like this, the people who wrote the script on this. You have someone like Cary Fukunaga, who recently made, we talked about last month, actually, with Jane Eyre. He directed that adaptation, and I think he was supposed to adapt it before he just had creative differences. I don't know, but he did work on the script with other people. And that's what we got, 2017, one of the highest grossing horror films of all time, if not the highest grossing film of all time, horror film, R-rated. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on the first part, Gioan, because we will talk about chapter 2, because they were like, you know what, they just put at the end of the movie, you go like, this was an all right movie, maybe, who knows, and then it just goes, chapter 1, it's like, oh, if you want more, they gave us more. We'll get to that. We'll get to
that. I mean, if I compare the two, It chapter 1 is far, far superior, but if I compared It chapter 1 to most horror movies that I've seen, it's okay. It's a passable experience. I've not really any love for It, and that's surprising because I'm genuinely terrified of clowns and I'm arachnophobic, so it's kind of the perfect pairing for me to be scared. Yeah. But I remember watching this in university in my first year. It was one of the first films me and my flat watched together, and everybody ended it saying, "Oh, it was okay. It was fine." And it's one of those films where I think it's really well directed, it's really well performed, and there's nothing within it that's essentially bad, but there's nothing in there that's like, wow, what an amazing time that was. And it's an especially a large issue for the second one, but we'll get into that. The first one is really well performed. It's got really great performances. I think Skarsgård's really quite creepy. He does that really well. And I think the child cast they get is fantastic, because you've got people from Stranger Things here and stuff like that. They're already credited actors. You're not taking a gamble on these people. They know what they're doing. And I think that really helps the first part. Just these are recognizable faces who are going to give a decent performance based on a book by Stephen King, which is superior to this adaptation. I do think there are scary moments in it, and I especially like the early moments. Like I'm talking about, like, opening credits are finished and you've got sort of like the eeriness of it, the ominous setting, and you're just seeing parts of Derry come to life. And I think that's done really well, because I think King spent so much time in the book doing that. It's nice to see that it's brought to life on the screen as well.
Yeah, and I will give credit to the cinematographer of this, Jeong Jong-hoon, who made a lot of great Korean cinema, especially of Park Chan-wook. He was his go-to cinematographer. Audiences will be seeing him really soon with Last Night in Soho.
And the Obi-Wan Kenobi series on Disney+.
Well, he got a good paycheck out of that, as he did with Hit. But yes, that's one of the biggest changes from the book, is that, of course, the book, it's set in the 50s, the child portion of it. Meanwhile, this one is set in the 80s. So that the second chapter would take place in modern times. I think 2016 is the actual date. And it's a choice that pays off, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think it's a choice that disrespects the book either, because Stephen King's gone back to stuff like The Stand and readapted it to fit modern times, where he's added like cell phones and stuff. To his credit, he put it at the start of the book, "Why are you reading this edition?" which is lovely after you spent £25 on it. But I think it has a right to take liberties with its setting and its story, because it's not a story that's set in one time. It's not something that has to be set in the 1950s and then the 1990s. And I do like that about it. It gives it that flexibility to say, oh, well, look at this, look at that. And I think especially for chapter 1, it gives it that 80s nostalgia that everybody's into at the moment.
Especially
stuff like
Stranger Things.
1 and Stranger Things, exactly. Sort of stuff that was coming out at that time was really reliant on nostalgia pop, zeitgeist sort of thing. And I can't blame them. They adapt it fairly well. And it doesn't make too massive a change to the core of the story, because why would it? It's just a different setting. You still have the same archetypes, still have the same political undertones, you still have the same background to all these characters. It's just 30 years later. And it's surprising how little impact it has. And I mean that in a good way, where it's sort of, yeah, these characters in the 1980s, you know why they're in the 1980s, because it's nostalgia driven. But I think Muschietti does it quite well. I think he does all right with that.
Yeah, and it fits with the whole idea of Derry, even in the book and in the second part, like the fact that it's almost a place just out of time, out of timeless in its own way, and it's so old. Nothing really changes there. Memory doesn't really exist almost. When you're living in it, you're living it, but as soon as you get out of it, you start forgetting everything. It's almost like there's a curse. The presence of it, it's almost like a curse on the city, on the town. It's just stuck.
Yeah, my town has that, but I don't think there's any clowns in it. It's just
a giant clown under the sewers. Just
at least that means something's happened in this place for the past 50 years. But yeah, I just I do like that though, the whole idea of as people move away from Derry, they start to forget things about it, because you know, in a lot of films, especially the ones that are driven by nostalgia, the nostalgia comes from that idea that people reminisce about their hometown, that they miss it and that they want to go back to it. This is on the flip side of it, where it's these people don't want to go back because they know what's there, but also because they don't really remember it. They have no fond memories. They have fond memories of their time with friends, but because they're associated with the place, it's just forgettable. And it's really well done. I really like that sort of aspect of it, and it would have been so much stronger had it carried over better to the second chapter. But that's just a whole different ball game, that one.
Yeah. How do you feel about the children portion in the book compared to the portion in the first chapter, whatever of it?
I think there's the one obvious scene in the book that we kind of can't not talk about because of this part of the comparison, and I don't think it's a necessary part, and I'm glad they didn't put it in the film. Christ.
You mean the giant orgy in the sewers?
Yes, I do. It's just no. Oh dear. It's neither hygienic nor ethical.
Stephen King, man. that's the coke in action.
I suppose cocaine is an excuse, but we've seen what it did to Hunter Thompson. I think I do like how the relationship and the dynamic between this group of losers is adapted to the film. I think it's done very well. I think it's performed excellently. I think it's fantastic. Especially Jaden Lieber. I butchered his name. Jaden Lieber as Bill Denborough. I think he's fantastic. I really do. And it's always a little cheat when I see his name pop up in credits. I do think he's a fantastic talent. He works so well with the rest of that group, who are each of them are really, really good. And I think a lot of the heavy lifting is performed by them. They take a lot of this text, which is quite dense and quite difficult to adapt when you think about the length of the book, and they take it and just run with it, and they run with it really well. I think they could have done with a bit of better support when you get to the big climax, when you get actually meeting with Pennywise for that first time and then the last time as well. There's sort of not a petering out per se, but just sort of there's all this preparation for a big climax, and then nothing really. Just it sort of put us along a little bit, and then it's nice to see it, and that interaction is necessary to set up the second one, but there's no finality with it, and obviously that's because they had another 3 hours to go through. But
yeah, I do always say, like, for me, horror, just to categorize it in a wider way, I always say that there's the more character-driven horror and there's the scares-driven horror. And it's interesting what they do with it, because the novel itself does have a lot of like scary moments, even though they've almost entirely been changed for the movie. Like, you don't have the mummy or the werewolf or none of that. Again, they fit more in the 50s context of what was scary back then, the swamp creature and all of that.
It always reminds me of that Back to the Future scene where Marty goes back and he's wearing like sort of just a rubber mask, and it's like, oh my god, a spaceman type thing.
Darth Vader in the room.
And I think that's good of them to acknowledge that things from the 50s are no longer really scary, and moving it to the 80s sort of gives you a lot of brevity and a lot of leeway to sort of say, well, the 80s stuff is still quite scary. You've got stuff like The Fly, you've got John Carpenter's best works, you've got all this terrifying stuff, and that's
The Nightmare on Elm Street
achieve exactly.
And it's interesting because it's almost a clash of sorts, if you want, and that's always the problem with movies like this, like It Chapter 1, that rely so hard on jump scares, so hard that no matter how good they are, because honestly they're pretty good. Like, the first time we're watching it, it's like, oh, I jumped a couple times. Nice. Good enough, good for you. but revisiting it, I think this was the third time watching it. I was just kind of like bored through almost all of the scary moments, because what Pennywise, let's say, or It does is that he feeds off the fear of the children before actually eating them. That's kind of its whole thing. Which is like, fair enough. But there's a limit to how often you can have just boogie, boogie, boogie. And the kids go, ah, and they leave. And that's the end of the scene. It's like, okay. And that's even worse in the sequel.
The second one takes the piss. So frequently. And I think just to add to what your point about jump scares, it's like they're good if they're done well. I think I don't mean to stereotype or just sort of generalize, but a lot of modern horrors that I've seen, sort of like your Paranormal Activities or your Insidiouses or The Conjuring, Sinister, that sort of brand of horror film that my friends like, and I've never really understood why. And I do think it's because they are scary, but the scares that they have are cheap. They're not narratively driven. They're not driven by character interactions. They're not driven by technique. They're just driven by things that come out of the blue are going to be scary. And of course they are. If you're sat in the dark and a face pops out, doesn't matter if it's Pennywise or like Bill Hader, you're going to be terrified. It's because it's the jump, it's the sudden surge of you realizing there's something there when there wasn't in the first place. It's
you lower the music, just all the sounds go quiet, like.
I think it's that predictability as well, and I think that's why I like it. The tension it creates is inevitable, but I think it's nice that people can work with it when they sort of just don't put a jump scare in and the music just returns to normal, or it's just like a character slowly walking out, just being like, oh, how's everyone doing? That sort of thing I really like.
Yeah, I rewatched very, not randomly, but like for a Patreon special of Clapper that's going to be recorded soon. I rewatched Trick or Treat yesterday. And that was kind of like, Jesus, there's some really good anti-jump scares in this. Or like every time you think there's going to be a jump scare, there's just not. And that almost unsettles you even more because you want the release. And that's something that it doesn't do.
And but it's a shame.
Yeah. But it still manages to work because, like you mentioned, the characters are interesting. Like all of the dynamics in the group. I especially like the relationship between Beverly and Ben. I think those two, it's very tender, very sweet. Sophia Lillis especially, like if I had to choose just one person of the cast, which like you mentioned, all of them are really good. I think she's probably my favorite out of all of them. She has a level of maturity to her performance that also worked really well in the show that she did. What's the name? I
Am Not Okay With This.
No, I haven't even. She did that. I haven't seen that. Sharp Objects.
Sharp Objects. That's the one.
She was in Sharp Objects.
I'm thinking of the bloody.
She was in that one as well.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the. It's the other one from Netflix. It's kind of like the end of the fucking world.
The not shit one.
The not shit one. But yeah, it all works, and you know it becomes a literal spook house at one point. They actually go into the house of It, and it's literally like opening the doors. What's going to be behind this? Everyone sees something different. It plays off their fears in ways that are fun in their own right. Some scares are definitely more memorable than others. But
yeah. I mean, it's not to say that there aren't notable scares. I always think the Georgie scene right at the start when the boat's going down the train, I do like that scene because even though you know what's going to happen, it's the variety of technical merits that come from building that up and making sure it has the effect that is desired. It's essentially the driving point for the rest of the movie you're about to see. And I think if we base It Chapter 1 on that moment alone, I'd say it does pretty well to continue from what it was setting out to do. That feeling of emotion, that sort of lost soul losers club type angle that King adapts well in the book. It's adapted well here. I just don't think there are enough scenes of that variety of horror to sort of recommend it to someone.
And it also plays incredibly well with it being a narrated film. because it's, especially since the original, like even if people haven't watched the 1990 miniseries, they probably have seen the clip on YouTube of the Georgie scene with Tim Curry, and the fact that in this one you see him like open his mouth and just taking a bite off of the kid's arm, and he's just bleeding and screaming and moving around like and just this long ad really coming.
That was a really good scream.
Thank you.
It's like the start of Blowout.
But it's a cool visual, and I remember watching that with an audience. You could feel people going, "Oh shit, they're not fucking around this time!" Like they're going straight in. They're like, "A kid has died." Like there's no two ways about it. It's not just Tim Curry going and just a zoom into his mouth. It's like no.
I don't know. I mean, Tim Curry's molars are pretty scary. You know,
that's true. That's also true.
I didn't get to watch the first one in cinemas. I did have the mistake of seeing the second one in cinemas.
Let's get into the second one. We've been beating around the bush. No.
I watched the second one in cinemas the day it came out, and I watched it in full room, which is one of the 3 cinemas I've been to where the room has been full. The other 2 are Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, of course. So It Chapter 2 is a break from the deviation of shite Marvel films that I've seen in the cinema that was full. And Downton Abbey as well was full for some reason. Just smelled like piss and catheter bags because everybody there was like 90. So
British pride right there.
I was the youngest person there by like 5 decades. It was terrifying.
Lowering the average age to 75.
I came out of that screening smelling like Werther's Originals. But when I went to see It Chapter 2, I went to see it with all my flatmates. It was like a big flat out because we just moved in. We thought, we'll get some food, we'll go and see a movie, that sort of thing. And when we got out, my flatmates, one of them was a film and media student, ironically had a shit taste in films. Even they didn't like it, and they really liked cheap horror. Like their favourite film was I Spit on Your Grave 2, the remake.
That's oddly specific.
Jesus. That's such a... Well, I did have the pleasure of watching that a week later.
Was it better than It Chapter 2?
A little bit, yeah, actually, yeah.
Probably shorter, I guess.
At least I Spit on Your Grave 2 knew what it is, and it knows it's shit, and it makes all its characters shit. The one thing I remember about seeing It Chapter 2 in the cinema is that about an hour in, and it's when they're at the baseball park, I think, and James McAvee's like trying to save the kid, and then it like sees him die. Everybody knew that jump scare was coming, and didn't react to it. And from there, not a single no gasp, no shock, no jeering or anything. It was just a dead atmosphere because they sort of just realized that's it. They've played all the tricks they had in the first hour. We've got 2 more to go. And
Jesus.
It's where I kind of appreciate the first one, even though I'm not the biggest fan of it. Its pacing is right, and it knows not to sort of throw out all the cards at once. The issue the second one has is that we kind of know that Pennywise is coming. You can't just build him up again. It's already been done.
And they try twice. You have 2 opening scenes in this film, and one is like 50 minutes in with the little girl.
Yeah. And it's what frustrates me as well is that the opening of It Chapter 2, I do really like. I don't know why.
I know some people really hate it. Well, it's a touchy subject because it's always weird to me because like it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like this one has Xavier Dolan who's playing is with another man. They're a gay couple at the park in Derry in modern days, 2016. And there's a group of people who just make homophobic remarks towards him, and then they just beat him up and throw him in the river, and Pennywise eats him. It's like people found it to be a hateful scene. Like, I mean, it's showing hate. I don't think it's meant to elicit.
Yeah,
it's. I think the response is exaggerated. It is very vicious. It's very brutal.
But it's like that in the book. It's a lot more drawn out in the book as well, where it's sort of, it actually takes up quite a good chunk of a few chapters actually dealing with the outcome of that and what it means for the sheriff's department. It's well handled, but I suppose for Chapter 2 it just kind of throws it in to be not reactionary, but just to sort of prep an audience for the gore and the horror
Yeah,
It's
and
not meant as
it's
anything more than
effective.
that.
In a way, it's
It is,
effective.
it is.
Yeah. Even if the book, like you mentioned, actually, that's a good point. The violence in the book and pretty much everything feels like it has a stronger impact in the long run.
Yeah.
Even the I forgot the bully's name. Henry Bowers.
Yes,
Henry
yeah,
Bowers is a horrible, horrible character. And Pennywise, of course, loves him because he's pure evil, and he loves the fear that he elicits in the children. And that's something that's present, like the fact that the adults are neither aware of it, nor are they really aware of the rest of the violence and abuse that those kids are suffering at the hands of the bullies and other adults as well. And the torture, especially that Ben suffers from him, the writing of the name in the skin, just carving it with a knife. It's awful, it's brutal. They do have it in the film, but again, like almost everything, unfortunately, in these movies, the event happens and it's almost forgot about on a character level, on a physical level, which is unfortunate. I think it's mainly a script problem.
Yeah, I think the script and its pacing is really like quite difficult. There's a lot of scenes where I can't remember if it's a hotel or just like a bed and breakfast thing where everyone's staying, and there's that many scenes on that fucking staircase where Bill Hader and James McAfee and Jessica Chastain just walking past each other like, oh, how do you do? More of the film is spent in that bloody corridor than anywhere else. And
it's a good set, man. They're going to use it. They spent good money on that staircase.
Well,
they have memorabilia, good quality props. They're going to be in the freaking movie.
I've managed to salvage one line from my review of It Chapter 2, which I published in 2019. It's the only line I'm happy with, and it's the scariest part of It Chapter 2 by far is its $79 million budget. And I like little things like that. That's the only line I could get from this review. And it is quite scary because the budget, I imagine, like just from a visual standpoint, a lot of it has gone on special effects. A lot of it has gone on those dream sequences with Bill Hader in the park. And the final 30 minutes, I'd say, where they actually go back to Pennywise's house. And I don't really think it lives up to the horror, because I think their rendition of horror beyond the Pennywise stuff is, really grey, cloudy, smoky stuff that's going to like freak people out. Look, there's John Carpenter references. And it's just shit. It's not scary to reference something. It's scary to think up an original effect. Is this the one where she's trapped in the lift and then she starts seeing things? Is that one of her the Pennywise vision where she's like sees her father and stuff in a bathroom? It's a bathroom.
It's the bathroom, yeah.
Stall. Yeah, no, I don't know why I thought of a lift.
It is very cramped and claustrophobic, yeah.
I think it's because there's a lift at work and it's absolutely tiny, and I'm up and down that like 20 times a day. So I'm just reflecting my horrors onto this film. But yes, when she's in the bathroom stall, that sort of claustrophobia and anxieties, it should be really well captured, but it's not. And I think the issue of it is because we're expecting it, but not in a sense of we can expect the emotions that come with it. It's just a blank canvas, and there's nothing really shown or acknowledged in these moments of horror. It isn't showing the growth of these characters. It's not showing their fears or their desires. It's just showing them as people who are stopping an evil, and that's it. And there's so much more than that in the book.
Yes, I do think that there's, rewatching it, I was a bit not kinder to it the first time around on the chapter 2, but I didn't hate it more than I wasn't expecting to. I was kind of like, you know what, I'm still rather ambivalent on this one, because there are moments of human connection between these characters that do feel true to the book, but there's so much filler. Like literally an hour of this movie is just nonsense filler that adds nothing of value. And I don't know how the script happened, because those are not the same screenwriters of the first one. Like Fukunaga is not involved. The only writer is Gary Doberman.
It's Gary Doberman, yeah. And I mean,
Chase Palmer didn't come back as well.
He's written the Salem's Lot adaptation that's coming out next year, which worries me.
I think he's directing it, isn't he?
He is, yeah. It'll be his second direction after Annabelle Comes Home, which is...
I enjoyed it, to be honest. Of the Annabelle films, is my favorite one. But that's not
I've never
saying
seen
much.
any of them. It's like, I've seen The Conjuring, and The Conjuring was okay.
If you have to watch any of them, which you don't have to do.
No, I have to.
But,
Mandatory.
I say the third one is all right. It takes the scares and the interesting premise. It takes it to a good level. Like, it gives you what you want. Like, you watch Conjuring and it's like, I want to see other shit in that room. What does the other shit do? And they're like, we're never going to show you that. But they do in Annabelle Comes Home.
That's what it struggles with, is what do the audience want to see from this? Because it implies that there's a connection to the characters from the first film, but then they've sort of engaged with the audience, and most of these audiences are still horror fans. They still want to just be scared by something, and you can't have that and then an hour and a half of filler where we watch these people eat food and go, oh yes, I remember when we did that as kids, and then flashback to when they were kids. And it's just so slow and it's so boring. And then the characters who are meant to be getting closer and are then isolated, so we can have those individual dream segments which just go on for ages. I remember the Bill Hader one did my head in, because I like Bill Hader. I just think the fascination about him as a person, his stance, I think is the word. Terrifying, utterly terrifying. That's scarier than anything in it too.
Truly.
And it's the same stuff for like John Mulaney, that sort of thing. It just freaks me out. But it feels like this is the cannon fodder that people can go to and point and say, this guy's a serious actor. He's done serious horror films. And it's like, he's just doing his stand-up shtick, and it works really well because everybody else is trying to take this seriously.
He's literally doing the stand-up. Like, he becomes in the book he's like a radio jockey, and in this one he's literally a stand-up comedian. It's Bill Hader, people.
They did right giving him the Stephen King cameo segment, though. Like, out of everybody that was going to get it, I think Hader was the best one to manage that. It's unfortunate that King's cameo feels like a seal of approval.
I mean, the man will actually put seal of approvals on the most shit things. The Dark Tower is a great thing.
Look, I interviewed the writer of The Dark Tower, and I didn't have the balls to ask him why he wrote that adaptation, but I feel I should have asked, because that film is awful.
It's a guilty pleasure for me, but like properly guilty. Like, I'm like, how can I enjoy this movie? I'm like,
that's a criminal guilt, Nick.
I should go to jail for that. Like, how can you like the shootout at the end? I'm like, I don't know. Idris Elba is just flying in the air and just going pew pew, and things blow up out of nowhere. It's like, sure, there's army people and zombies. I don't know. Matthew McConaughey is just chewing the scenery.
As someone that's not read the books, it really confused me. It was like,
I haven't read the books as well, actually.
Here's 3 books in 90 minutes. Go. It's so strange. So, I mean...
better than It Chapter 2, that's like 3 hours long. It's like, I'd rather take 90 minutes of Idris Elba shooting people.
You could cut It Chapter 2 down to about 40 minutes. Because there's nothing going on.
Go to the climax.
You could do it like, you know, that TV show 24, where they have like multi-cameras on it all at once. Just do it like that. Just do six of those, show the characters, throw them into the house. That'd be easier.
The moment they actually split up, you just see them at the same time. Like, here was everyone's doing.
Because apart from Chastain, McAfee, and Hader, couldn't give a shit, honestly.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because just nothing matters. And the way it's structured, every one of those scares, like, characters goes to place. They have flashback to childhood. Childhood self sees Pennywise do something. Cut back to modern day. They find object. They turn around. Pennywise is still there. Oh my god! And they run away. And Pennywise just taunting them. Okay.
When I watched it in the cinema, it wasn't noticeable. Like, it just kind of drifted by me, and I didn't realize that was just sort of the set list they'd done. But on a rewatch, where it's like they're doing this 5 or 6 times, and it's ridiculous how simple it is. And I suppose it's the only way to sort of deviate from. I mean, I don't know. I know they need to get this information to the audience, and it's good that they do so. But they could have done it with variety. They could have done it as like sort of Not, I mean, in the book it's done well because you've got that flutter between past and present because you haven't seen it yet. And the issue there is that It Chapter 1 has already broached the subject, and It Chapter 2 can only remind audiences 2 years later that, oh yes, they're still here. And it doesn't work. And I do suppose that's because, I mean, after reading it, because I'd seen the films first, it does seem like a difficult book to adapt because it jumps between chapters and perspectives and timelines so quickly. And I really like that about the book because I feel like we focus on the films a bit much because of how shite they are. But what I love about the book, and to be honest, it's not my favorite King. It's all right. It was really long. But
Yes.
I'm glad I read it. Because we'll broach this subject on the King special we're doing, but I'll mention it here briefly. My problem with King's writing, and I do love his writing, is that sometimes he overdoes it, especially Misery. That's my love-hate relationship with Misery. I love that book, but I love the film a little bit more because it tones it down. With It, I think he gets away with it because there's that much going on, and it's that long, and it's that ability he has where a chapter will just end halfway through a sentence and he picks it up in a different era or a different character's perspective. And the first few times I read it, I thought, that's a bit cheesy. I don't know how I feel about that. But then you see the effect of it and the actual way it forms a timeline, the way it forms this relationship between how the character is now and who it was before. I think it's phenomenal. And I think it's one of his strongest assets. And it's the fact that he's tried something different.
And you're living like the experience alongside the characters of actually going back in time with their memories and that's one of the key themes of the book. Is just not only the importance of childhood, but the importance of memories, of maintaining history, a track of things that happen through time, of writing, of telling stories. That's a key aspect of the novel. And especially with the death or the suicide of Stan as an adult, the fact that it happens relatively early on in the book, and that presence, that event is felt throughout because you keep seeing him alive as a kid and you see the adults talking about it. In the film, like in the first film already, Stan does very little, and he has a big speech that they cut out and then they reuse it conveniently at the end of chapter 2. But just his death, you never really feel the impact of that. It's very much one of those, like, in the script, they feel the impact. They have to feel it. It's like, yeah, sure, they have to feel like that. But I don't think any audience member was like, oh no, Stan, my favorite character, is dead.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And I think that's because we spend so much time individualizing and experimenting with these characters. And I use the word experiment loosely there because it is a very tried formula after you've seen it 4 times over. Is that you're getting all this detail about characters that are alive, and there's so little about Stan that the audience have no choice but to forget his impact, especially when it was kind of butchered. It was lost in the translation of the film. And it is understandable. There is only so much you can do with a character that only has prominent scenes when he's in the 1980s or the 50s in the book. And there's no real workaround of that. I do think it's kind of cheap for them to rely on scenes that were cut from the first film to push forth with this idea that he was relevant. Because again, audiences probably don't care. Like, I forgot he was there. Like, he doesn't do much in the first film, and it's hard to make a connection when there are so many characters. Yes. Like, people are going to be focused on this performance or that performance. It's not a bad performance from the kid, whose name I have forgotten. But I think his name's Wyatt or something, isn't it?
Wyatt Olive. Yeah.
I knew I was right. I knew I was there with Wyatt. Oh,
it was in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Everyone's in Guardians of the Galaxy. It's jury service.
He was in Someone Married Barry. I think I'm like one of the 5 people who've seen that. Anyway. Classic comedy.
Oh, God. But yes, it's not a bad performance. It's just, it's not even unremarkable. It's a solid performance, but there is so much going on for the other characters, and there is so much more detail for them. It's inevitable that he's going to get forgotten because these characters have more to do, especially when, you kill them off in the first 10 minutes of the second film. And then you wrap it all up at the end by handing out letters. it makes as much sense as Peter Bogdanovich's cameo, which is beautiful, but I don't get it.
Yeah, the references in the second It are just weird.
It
was like,
infuriates
what?
me.
Yes, and I find it funny that again, like I watched Trick or Treat yesterday, and that one has a much better use of the "you got to be fucking kidding me" from The Thing, because this movie has it again, but it's literally the scene from The Thing. The head is on the floor, and it becomes the spider.
I thought I'd Mandela affected myself. I thought I'd made that scene up in my head, but I'm glad you've mentioned that because I wasn't sure I was dreaming or not. A lot of sleepless nights these days, and a lot of, look at these bags under my eyes.
These blur.
But the world is in motion. I just didn't believe that scene could exist because of how shit it was. And isn't it Bill Hader that says it? Or
I think he does, yeah.
Of course he does. He's the comedian character.
It's not even it's not even a homage. It's literally the moment. It's the same thing.
What were those doodle pads you'd get where you'd fill in the blanks with like verbs and stuff? It's one of those. And I think the issue as well is that, like I said at the start of this recording, there is not a fine quality to be found in either of the films. I don't particularly like either of them, but the comparison between the first and the second makes the first one look fantastic. And both of them have issues with pacing, with their derisions of story, with their elements of technical aspects. It's just all a bit of a cluster at times. Where It Chapter 2 fails is it then has to solve this entire narrative, and it has 3 hours to do it. And that's far too much time. That is way too long to fill this narrative up.
And it's shocking because a 3-hour movie and you feel like you don't know the characters at all. I mean, while you're reading the book and it's like, okay, I actually, give me more time with them in the present. Like, what happened in those years? And they rely too much on archetypes, on cliches. Especially what's unfortunate is it's Bill's wife, who's a much more prominent character in the book, and in this one she's just a bitchy actress, and you never see her again. She's in one scene with Peter Bogdanovich, and that's it.
And it's a shame because
you don't see that. You want more.
In the book, I absolutely love the ending of the book, and I will spoil it here, so just close your ears or whatever if you've not read it. Where the driving, and she's catatonic, and he's driving so fast, and it's just such a great release. And it's not a happy note to end on. It's a satisfying one though, because it's sort of the growth of the characters is then clear as day, but the issues that they've experienced don't just sort of fade away because Pennywise is gone, which is what the film kind of feels like. It's like, yes, what a time that was. Now we've forgotten, and that's it. And it's
even though we lost 2 friends.
Well, yeah. That's swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I do think ultimately the problem, the first It works. It's not great per se. It's definitely lost a lot of impact for me over the years because of just how ultimately dull it becomes once you know the scares. There's meat there, there's substance. It works as an adaptation of the novel, of the childhood part at least. It could have used more bite. I don't know if I've just become desensitized, but I think it could have pushed some elements more, maybe here and there.
I think because, I mean, we were talking about this before we started with Titan. I remember watching Raw, and that's such a gory and artistically pleasing piece that it's kind of, I prefer that now. It's not that I don't appreciate what it does, which is very, not commercialized, but it's very sort of, there's gore, it'll scare someone. It's the depth of it and what it means for the characters, because in it's like, Georgie's lost his arm, this means his brother will be sad. In Raw, it's like the implication is that this character is actually quite terrible, and then they explore that with more gore and more violence, and there's actual set pieces that linger on the camera, and it's very reactionary, it's very knee-jerk. It's like, oh my god, that's scary, quick cut away, we don't want to show that too much,
and overly reliant on CGI as well.
Yeah, which is a
Which
shame, especially
no
when you're
impact.
going to, especially when you're trying to embrace John Carpenter, who was notorious for his physical aesthetics. But who am I to judge?
Yeah, that's what I don't like. As a final point on it, chapter 2, is that it feels rushed. Because the first one, they had years working on it, working on the script, getting the cast, making it. They got a wonderful cinematographer making the shots and everything, and it looks great. And the second one, they were like, okay, the kids are gonna age up way too quickly. We got all of the actors that people want to be in the movie, even though I don't think they're the best choices. At least James McAvoy, out of everyone, I'm not the biggest fan of Jay Ryan, who plays the older version of Ben. He's just kind of there. It's like, sure.
I have a real soft spot for James McAvoy. Because he's in another film about a book that just simply shouldn't have been adapted, Filth, and I absolutely love Filth. I think it's one of my it probably is in my top 10 just of all time.
Nice.
I absolutely adore that film. He has a penchant for being in things that just shouldn't be adapted to film.
He was in a Dune novel adaptation, Children of Dune or something like that.
Oh, he was? Oh,
he was, yeah. Bringing it back to the next thing.
It was in Wanted as well.
But the best adaptations.
Speaking of Dune, now you had the pleasure of seeing the new one. I have had the pleasure of seeing the title Dune World, which is meant to cash in on the new one. So I think we're pretty primed and ready to talk about it.
Yeah. Let's talk about Dune.
Thankfully the 80s one, not the one that looks really shit and boring.
Do you see this? Put your right hand in the box.
What's in the box?
Pain. Stop. Put your hand in the box. I hold at your neck, the Gom Jabbar. This one kills only animals.
Are you suggesting that Duke's son is an animal?
Let us say, I suggest you may be human. Your awareness may be powerful enough to control your instincts. Your instinct will be to remove your hand from the box. If you do so, you die.
I will briefly talk about the new one at the end of the conversation, just for comparison sake. But
I'm interested to hear what you think.
Oh man, I had thoughts, but Dune was a science fiction book written by Frank Herbert. I've heard so many pronunciations of his name, like Ebert. I don't know. Herbert sounds better. Whatever. 1965. We're talking about classic sci-fi literature here. Again,
classic a book meaning they can't get their head around time travel and other shit like that.
Those were the days, man. You know, they were simpler, they were nicer, everything was quicker. And Dune was an incredibly giant novel. It changed the face of sci-fi forever. It inspired countless writers. Because I would say the main difference that separates Dune from other sci-fi stories is that this is all about the mind. It's all about the power of the mind. It's not about fancy technology and flying cars and other things, because it does have fantastical elements like that. It does have spaceships and stuff, but it's not about technological improvements, but it's all about the improvement of the mind, of what humans are capable of. And it's a political novel. It has this character, Paul Atreides. I'm gonna struggle to remember all of the names in this because Jesus Christ, there's so many names.
You're not the only one. I know Kyle MacLachlan.
It's the Kyle. I know the character. I know the actor's name better than the character's names. It's like the Bene Gesserit, and it's the Mujahideen. It's all of those. It's steeped. Well, this is a point of controversy actually with the novel itself. That's carried through the adaptations as well, but it's steeped in Arab culture because it's about desert people. It's also basically lots of planets, year 10,100 something. and two houses are at war: the house of Atreides and the house of the fat people. What's their name?
Just say it's Tatooine from Star Wars. We all know Dune was based on Star Wars.
House Harkonnen. House Harkonnen. Those are the baddies.
Yes, that's the one, yeah.
The baddies are the Harkonnens, led by a baron. And so basically they're kind of at war with each other. There's a lot of tension. And House Atreides inherits the planet Arrakis, the Dune desert planet. And it's interesting because, to make it very, very short, because there's just a lot. Again, this was a long read. But to make it super short, basically, it's all about politics. It's all about one man changing the system. And it's also about that one man understanding that he's going to become a problem for the future. It's about being inspired by heroes, but also how heroes are destined to become villains, how their ideas will be misshapen and misunderstood by those who follow them. They become bigger than themselves. In that sense, it's very interesting how it destroys the idea of heroes, of myths.
Yes.
How it destroys the establishment. There's a lot of interesting ideas in this one. And I think the novel is rather great. Like, I was reading, I was like, this is actually better than I was expecting. Less heavy-handed in a way than everything else. And to quickly touch on controversies again, this does appropriate a lot of terms from Arab culture. I mentioned Mujahideen is the name that he chooses as the leader of the prophet, the chosen one, whatever, for the Fremen, not the free men, the Fremen who live in the desert. And there's elements of that where it's kind of like a white savior thing. You also have accusations of this being not anti-feminist tale, but you definitely have the element of, the Bene Gesserit is this group of women, religious group of women who have psychic powers, and the mother of Paul Atreides was a Bene Gesserit, and she was supposed to give birth to a daughter, but she gives birth to him, purposefully so, to a child, a boy, and he's more powerful than they can ever be, and they can do more cool shit than the women. So there's some controversies in that sense. I wanted to acknowledge them, but honestly, they don't matter much, I think,
No,
in the novel's sense, at least.
It's good to acknowledge those as well, because they are, obviously, they're prevalent in the book. I think what surprises me the most about Dune, though, or June, I don't actually, it's been like 6 months since I read it, and I still don't know how to pronounce it. June?
I would say Dune.
Dune. The thing I am amazed with about Dune is that I was a bit nervous before I started reading. I was absolutely terrified because it's a big book, and it's got such a, especially now, it's got such a prevalent stance in pop culture and discussion online and in person. Is that, and it's quite a big book. It's very jargon heavy, very confusing at times, but none of that put me off. And I think it's because I was so fascinated by it. And he appropriates a lot of culture, and yes, he does a lot of things quite tensely and quite crudely, but the overall effect is an extremely tight, well-written science fiction piece that takes its liberties with real-world culture and the politics of the time and what extends into the now. And the trade-off of that is such a rich lore and such an interesting universe. And it's not often that I find sci-fi interesting enough to sort of read further on and find out more. And I do feel inclined to with Dune, because there's so much of it. There is so much going on. It doesn't feel stagnant yet. It doesn't feel corrupted, not by Herbert, but by fans and merchandise and stuff like that. And I don't know if that just makes me sound like a hipster, pretentious loony, but one of my big issues with Star Wars is the fan base. I would love to get into Star Wars. I used to play the Lego games as a kid. It was how I got introduced to Star Wars. But then every time you try and talk to a Star Wars fan, in my experience, it's been, well, if you've read comic edition number 127, you know this wasn't true. And it's like, I don't have time for that. I do have time for Dune, though, because it doesn't expect you to know everything. It's very nice in that sense. It's sort of like a, come along, we're going this way. It's like, but what happens if we go over there? It's like, that is for another time and another book written by somebody else 30 years later. Leave it be.
There's a lot of books.
There's a hell of a lot of. I was in Waterstones
Jeez.
today, and there was just a shelf solely of Dune sequels, and it's like there's so many. There's Children of Dune. There's the Dune adaptation on Sci-Fi Network. There's so much of it, and it's nice that it has both the longevity but also not the pop culture hold it should have, especially with Lynch's adaptation, because I mean, at the time of him directing that, he was a pretty big name. He'd done Eraserhead, he'd done The Elephant Man, he'd been nominated for an Academy Award, and I guess that gave not just him but the producers the confidence to say, okay, now's the time to do this, because Jodorowsky's adaptation, I'm pretty sure the reason it got canned was because of the budget.
It was insane, Jesus. It had everyone in that.
But the budget for David Lynch's edition of Dune was 40 million, which is like, in 80s money, that's like a lot. Yeah. In today's money, that's sort of an independent film. But it's such a big gamble, and it doesn't work. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I don't think Toto and Brian Eno doing the soundtrack helped much. But
well, who knows? Who knows? Maybe that's the key ingredient, actually.
Yeah, Brian Eno, get on the Prophecy theme 3 years after Remain in Light. I remember I watched Dune at the start of the first lockdown, so like April last year. I wasn't a fan of it, and then rewatching it, and you messaged me saying watch the extended edition, and I did, and I liked it a lot more than when I watched just the regular edition, which I had on DVD. I have a lot more appreciation for it because I think, especially after reading the book, you can't expect someone to adapt this well. It's such a monumental task, and I think we've accidentally made a nice pairing of the books we're talking about today. These two books that on paper seem rather simple to adapt. One's a horror film, the other one is a science fiction flick, and it's the detail, the small little things that you notice in the book that are lacking in the film, and it's like those little details are what make Dune so great. It's what really presents the world around them, and one of the most fascinating parts of the book, I thought, was Atreides and the world around him. Not so much him, but who he was interacting with, where he was going, why there was conflict. And it's written so well, and especially because of the time it was written in. Like, Frank Herbert writing this in the mid-1960s is monumental, because apart from stuff like H.G. Wells, you had people. I've got a little shelf behind me, and I always pick them out, little sci-fi books that I find in the free bookstore, because they look like shit. And a lot of early sci-fi is awful. It's like, my goodness, we've invented the time travel. What shall we do with it? And then they do nothing with it. They send someone about 20 minutes into the future and they go, ye gods, what have we done? So to write something so big in a time where people were picking up essentially like pocketbooks that they would take with them on train journeys and bus journeys just to sort of read, it was filler for the mind. And to write something of such epic proportions is incredible, not because it works, but because of how far it goes against the culture of the times and how sort of marketized it was and sterilized that writing had become at that point. And it did pave the way for a lot of influential works in itself. Obviously, we mentioned Star Wars. That's kind of the inevitable takeaway from it. And I've always wanted to watch that Jodorowsky's Dune documentary.
I haven't seen it yet, actually.
It's by the sounds of it, it's sort of like the correlation between Star Wars and Dune is more than coincidental. And you can see that, you can, but yeah, I really enjoyed the book, and rewatching the film wasn't incredible, but I really, if anything, I just really felt for Lynch, to be honest, because I've got a rocky relationship with Lynch. But not personally, obviously, I don't know the guy, but like as far as his films go, I absolutely adore some of them, and I really loathe some of the others. But we can get into that if you want.
Sure.
I don't want to be mobbed. I've already been attacked by ABBA fans today. I got death threats for saying that one of their singles wasn't that good. Have you ever pissed off 14,000 ABBA fans? They're beasts. They're horrible, terrifying people. But
best left
I don't
alone.
know if the Lynch mob might kill me.
Well, speaking of Lynch, if anyone who's listening knows me, they probably know that I'm a massive fan of Lynch, to the point I'd probably say it's my favorite director of all time. and truly, yeah. And Dune was my last movie of his that I had to watch, and I saw it in 2019, late 2019. And I was like, you know what, this is actually all right. I didn't read the novel yet. I didn't know much about any of it. I was like, you know what, takes a long time to get going in extended cut. But it was all right. I was like, there's themes, there's things that happen. There's a cool total soundtrack here. It's like, yeah, it works. And so reading the book and then going back to this, I think the most shocking thing is how pretty accurate it is, pretty faithful even in adapting the novel. The original theatrical cut is a bastardized version. I think both versions have the Alan Smithy credit in the opening for the director, because it's the name that the directors use, is the alias that they use when they just disassociate themselves from a project. So basically, it's the way of saying, this is not what I wanted to do. I don't agree with this at all. So I'm Alan Smithy now. And it's fascinating because I don't think it's that bad. I do think an abridged version of it probably cuts so much lore, so many explanations of the politics and the characters that everyone is, that it's kind of like mind-numbing. And even having read the book, watching the opening 10, 15 minutes of this, they're just a massive exposition dump with storyboards, you just kind of go, it's the Emperor and the Mujahideen and the Arconans and what? I don't know what's happening here. Go to space action. That's the strength of the book, and you mentioned it great. I totally agree with what you said, Ewan. The strength of the book is that you're still able to follow it despite all of the jargon, because it's a classic hero's journey. It's the chosen one prophecy. It's him going on the adventure. It's reaching the bottom when everyone has died, and picking himself up and being reborn, almost literally as well here. It's following what John Campbell did, and Lucas took from it as well, going back to the well, and it's effective. It works, just works, and I do think this is primarily held back not only by trying to be almost too faithful to the book, because there's so much talking at times, especially in the first hour of this. There's kind of like, it's too much. It's too much, way too much. And it's also held back by the effects, because try as they might, there are some really impressive sets, backdrops, and matte paintings in this. But when they're riding the sandworms, I made a GIF out of that. I was a GIF or whatever. I just made one out of it and just put it on Twitter. I was like, I'm gonna look at that whenever I'm feeling down, because I just love Cal MacLachlan and the other guy just standing on top of the thing, just looking at each other and just smiling like, hey, like, yeah, just to paint to the background moving. There's no camera shakes, no nothing. Bless them. And total soundtrack. Dun, 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 dun. It's like, yeah. Yeah. There's an element of camp almost that's effective in here. It's endearing.
It is, and I think that's the greatest strength. That I know Lynch doesn't like his work on this film. I think he said at a Q&A, it was like, why do you like this film? Or something like that. And yeah, I see where it's coming from. It's sort of like the blue eyes that light up. It looks a bit shit now. But that's, I find it hard to knock the special effects when they look bad here. Mm-hmm. They do look bad, but I think for what they had at the time, it's rather endearing, and for the budget they have and for what they're trying to achieve. And it's like you said, it's the greatest effort for the book is that it's still readable and you still acknowledge everything that's going on, despite it being very jargon heavy, despite there being all these sort of names and roles that are just invented for the audience, especially a Western audience who might not be, coming to terms with the appropriation of Arab culture. Is that you have a lot of titles and roles and opportunities for development elsewhere, and loads of stuff is going on, but it is streamlined to a point where you know who people are off of their writing, their dialogue, what they say to one another. you know who's in positions of power, you know who's trying to get to where they need to be next. And I think that's a shame for the adaptation that Lynch does, is that I absolutely love the ending of the first book, where he comes to power, he's now the emperor, and he realizes that it's now too late, essentially, even though what he was doing for the whole of the book is justified and it's relevant and it's the right thing that he's doing at most times. And the ending of the film is just such sort of a sudden one. It's like he beats the guy in the fight. It's raining, and then it ends, and it's the credits give me such joy, where it's like their name and then they appear like a wrestler in a video game, and the waves behind them.
Yeah, it's the water. Like yeah.
And it's stuff like that, and especially the fight at the end. And I know Dune came out before it, but it reminds me of Flash Gordon. It reminds me so much of that style, that sound, that effect, and it reminds me of the Timothy Dalton fight that they have, where they're on the pit that's shaking above the void.
If anything, Flash Gordon builds upon this to make something truly great.
It's the electric guitar in the finale. It sounds a bit like Queen as well. It's like,
yes,
come on, lads. They've predated Flash Gordon.
That's when the soundtrack lights up. It's during the last 30-40 minutes. It's like the epic theme.
Brian Eno.
Yeah, that's the good stuff.
And it's such a stacked cast. So it's kind of like, I think he's smart with casting so many big names. You know, you've got Brad Dourif, you've got Max von Sydow, you've got McLachlan, Joseph Ferrer, you've got a
Patrick
huge
Stewart,
cast.
Brad
Patrick
Dourif,
Stewart, Sting, Dean Stockwell, Sean
Virginia
Young,
Madsen.
And I think that's where I think the casting makes sense, not just because these are big names and that they're great performers, but that applying these people to a role that is signified by their movement, by their dialogue, by what they look like, it makes something like Dune so much easier to acknowledge, because on the paper you have the benefit of just rereading it. You can just go back and think, all right, this is who this is who that is. With the film, they're so distinguishable and so different. It's like, all right, you know who this guy is, you know who that lass is. And the great thing about that is that Lynch adapts that really well. I think he does such a great job of realizing that there's a lot of information, there's a lot that can't be cut. So the best way to get around that is to make something so vivid and so stylish. And I do have a lot of appreciation for what Dune's visuals are like. I'm really impressed with them. It looks unbelievable.
Yeah.
I'm surprised, and it's why I'm so nervous to see the new one, because it's the scene towards the end where McLachlan's in the black suit, he's got the nose piercing with the wire on it and stuff like that. It looks great. And then in the new one, the Villeneuve one, it just kind of looks a bit bland, and it kind of just looks, it's a dusty planet with sand on it. Yeah, that's it. At least with Lynch's version, it has like color to it, even though it is just one block color. It's brown, it's sand, but then it's contrast with the dark suits, and then the layer over the camera makes it distinguishable. With the trailer, and I hope it's different in the movie, you'll know better than me, but it just looks really, it has no flourish. It looks very, very cut and standard to a producer's level of, it must look like this, it must look like the new latest sci-fi project. And it's a shame, because Dune is such a, even despite it being on a sand planet, it's such a colorful book, it's such an imaginative book. And it's that respect I have for Lynch with this one, where it isn't a good adaptation, but it's such a good go at it. I can see where he's trying, and he is trying his best. I don't get that feeling with Villeneuve, but I've only seen the trailer, so I can't really say much on it.
Yeah, no, the Lynch version has like small changes here and there to the story, to the characters that don't really matter to the grand scheme of things. I think that's, again, commendable in its own weird way. It did primarily work on the script himself. In his autobiography, he does talk about having the co-writers of Elephant Man actually working on a first version of the script. They were writing it together, but then he kind of scrapped some of the work they did, and they finished writing it himself. He had a bit of an ego back then. That's when he was staying with the wrong kind of people and becoming too much of a Hollywood hotshot. But he needed this.
He turned down Star Wars, didn't he? Return of the Jedi.
He did. Yeah. I think it was. I don't remember if it was after or before. Like, when did Return of the Jedi?
I think Return of the Jedi was 83.
83. Then yes. Then he turned it down before. Yeah. After Elephant Man.
I would rather have a shit Dune adaptation than a good sci-fi Star Wars adaptation with Lynch's name on it. I would rather see the man struggle in passion than succeed in density.
Jesus. Imagine David Lynch's Star Wars The Return of the Jedi.
God.
What world we could have been in. I do love that story. Like, if you're listening to the episode, search on Google David Lynch Return of the Jedi, and you'll see just Lynch recounting it. He had a fever, and he went to George Lucas's house, and he's just talking about Ewoks and the stuff, and he just gets a bigger headache. It's like, no. I don't know what you're talking about. This is not for me, George.
While you're on the Lynch binge on YouTube, always just go for David Lynch iPhone. That's a classic. I've watched one film on my phone, and I'm very proud of that, and it was Paul Blart Mall Cop 2. Because it was the only film I could download, and it was for a flight. And it would have been... I'm terrified of flying. I would have rather sat and stared out the window than watched that film again. But naturally, it's on the shelf behind me.
Of course, in Blu-ray quality.
I wish. It's been some years since I saw Paul Blart Mall Cop. But
it's an upgrade.
I need it in 4K.
They do the box set. It's the first and the second one with 2 hours of bonus features.
Jesus, someone sellotaped the Observer Report onto the back of it as well. Good old Seth Rogen.
The Lynch version, I do like it. As a fan of Lynch, I am biased, of course. It is easily his weakest film for me.
Really?
Yes. Let's just say, like, I'm not giving star ratings anymore, but I'd probably give 5 stars to 7 of his films. So, like, Eraserhead, maybe Elephant Man, let's just say, Blue Velvet, Wild at Heart, Lost Highway, Fire Walk with Me, Mulholland Drive. And I'm just listing his movies now, so I think. Yeah. Let's just say everything that's not Dune. And probably let's say Elephant Man. I do really like Elephant Man.
Elephant Man's my favorite of his.
There's always something missing for me to give it that 5-star just rating. I don't know what.
I think Dune is his second weakest film. I don't want to say his weakest film because I feel like I'll be shot.
Wild at Heart.
No, I like Wild at Heart.
Inland Empire.
I've not seen Inland Empire.
Mulholland Drive.
I don't mind Mulholland Drive.
Lost Highway.
No,
wait, Eraserhead.
Yeah.
Oh.
I do not like Eraserhead, but it's been a long time since I've seen it.
I had Eraserhead near the bottom of my list, together with Inland Empire, and then rewatched them. I was like,
I gave Eraserhead a generous 2. I remember coming out of that film, watching it, and I just thought, what a bunch of fucking nonsense.
Oh, it's a lot of nonsense.
And I think it works better in other Lynch films. Like, I really, really like Lost Highway. I think that's a fantastic film. And even The Straight Story, more of like a streamlined Hollywood offering. It's so emotionally driven. I think if I want weird Lynch, I'd watch Fire Walk with Me.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see a recut of Dune with the Angelo Badalamenti score. I would love to see how much that changes the film, because there's a lot of Lynch flourishes in here. Like, some people tend to say, "Oh, it's not really a Lynch film." But if you're watching it, like, you can tell the obsession with visions and dreams, and the little man rising against the system in a way. It's, there's Lynchian things in this. The opening of the theatrical cut, especially.
It definitely has sort of his style to it.
Mm.
I don't think it's one of those films where anyone could direct this. It's definitely an extremely personal, not personally, but just sort of a film that is notable for him. You can tell it's him doing it. You can tell these flourishes are him. I think people could replicate that, but it wouldn't have the emotional drive behind it. It wouldn't have those messages of dreams and meaning behind it. And I think that's where I can give Dune sort of I can let it off a bit. I can let the films go, because it's not adapting everything in the book. It's trying to cram in as much as possible for the zeitgeist and the iconography of all these scenes, but at its core, Lynch is kind of changing the message of what he wants to talk about. He's still including all this political array and the distress of it all and the rise of the empire, but cutting out that last section of the book. In its place is those notions of dreams and the sort of substance of them and what it means for his future. It's not, I don't know, it feels quite spiritual in a way, but I do think that's adapted really nicely. And I think it's a nice trade-off. It's not as interesting as sort of the political explosion that happens in the book, but how can you even adapt that to the screen? I'm terrified to see what Villeneuve's offering will bring.
Well, let me talk about the Villeneuve version for a little bit. Because like you briefly mentioned, I did see this early. I saw this at the Venice Film Festival this year. Not the premiere, of course. People always presume it's the premiere. Assume it's a premiere. It's not, thankfully.
Was it the premiere?
It wasn't, actually. Fun story. This isn't public anywhere, but I did interview Isabelle Sandoval at the festival.
Oh, yes, you did.
I was there, which is highlight of all the years going to the festival. Loved her so much. She's delightful. And we were talking, like, this year they messed up big time with the booking of the tickets because there were like problems with the system. Things were just messed up. She herself was having problems booking tickets to films. And she told us that Luca Guadagnino did not manage to get tickets to the Dune premiere.
Oh my God. Even
being very, very important director and friends with Timothée Chalamet and other actors, he didn't manage to get tickets to the premiere. It was like, makes me feel better about myself.
By the sounds of it, a lot of festivals this past year have been having a few issues. I know Jack was having a few issues with
London.
London with the Spencer screening. Oh God.
Poor Jack. God.
At least he got to see it. And I'm stuck watching Diana the Musical. I don't know why I take that shit anymore. I see it pop up on the Trello board and I'm like, oh yes, please.
It's all I needed was the trailer. It was like, you know what? That's all I needed to see. I think I saw it the day after Spencer. I think it came out like that. I was like, oh, I did see Spencer. Before Titan, it was my favorite film of the year. I'd have to rewatch Spencer though. I do love Titan a lot. But speaking of Dune, I did watch it as okay. Full disclosure, I tried getting tickets to the press screenings in the morning, 8 a.m., nothing, 11 a.m., nothing. I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm not watching this film. I don't care. I didn't care before. I'm not watching it now. And I got forced by my flatmates there, my friends, to watch it at the midnight screening because they added an extra midnight screening for fans because everyone wanted to watch it. I was like, I don't want to. And I was like, fine, I'll just click on this and just see if there's a seat. And there was literally one seat left in the bottom right corner of this massive screening room. I was like, all right, let's do this. We went, lots of caffeine in my body. The movie starts. And let me tell you, this might be maybe not the loudest, but one of the loudest movies I've ever seen. Our good boy Hans Zimmer has made the score.
Oh, that's good for me and my tinnitus.
Man, like, I'm not joking. There were two movies where I was just walking outside of the festival and I was just hearing the ground shaking. I thought there was a earthquake. One movie was Dune. The other was The Last Duel by Ridley Scott. So get ready for that. Both movies really fucking loud, Dune especially. And it was effective because, I mean, it's midnight and you have these massive sounds like... just booming constantly. I didn't like this film. Just flat out saying it. I was not a fan.
I remember when you injected the coverage, and I remember reading your tweets about it, and I thought I was waiting to see you next time. I just forgot. What was it about this new one that you just didn't like?
Just boring. If anything, again, this fits with what we talked about with It, because what I really like about the first It is that it's called It. It starts off as It. It's a complete story, and at the end it says It Chapter 1. Dune, that on the poster says Dune, starts with Dune Part 1. Like literally the first fucking thing you see is the title, Dune Part 1. It's like, no.
You better get James McAvoy back for that Children of Dune spin-off.
Oh, I wish. I could have given him a cameo in this one.
Yeah. Do you think there'll be another one though?
Yeah, I mean, that's literally the only benefit of the doubt I gave this movie, because it was like, you know what, it's 2.5 hours of nothing. I can even tell you where it ends, actually, if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, it's not like a spoiler. It's the book. It's the movie. It's not like a big spoiler.
No, don't. I wiped the book from my mind so I could experience Villeneuve's vision.
Oscar Isaac dies. Anyway.
Oh no.
He plays the father. Does play the father.
Spoilers.
The movie ends after the quick duel that he has with the Fremen, the one Fremen. It was like, I'm gonna test you. Yes. He's like, I don't want to kill you. And they have the fight, and he just stabs him. You know, well, I guess you're with us now. And just the movie ends. I was like, oh, okay. You could honestly feel like it was, by the time the movie ended, it was 3 a.m. You could feel people in the room were just so done with the movie, because everyone, it was basically like an army of Chalamet fans. There was like 600 of them. And like barely anyone applauded when the title came out. They were like, hey, yeah. Well, Timothée Chalamet, yeah. Just, you could feel the energy pick up again. But just people were so done with it. Nothing happens. It takes 2.5 hours, or a little bit more than 2.5 hours, to tell you what the Lynch version does in almost 2 hours, with way less excitement, a lot of more dull, slog, boring dialogue scenes of just bureaucracy and politics. Beautifully shot, yes. Great effects, like, man, the effects are truly insane. I was watching, I was like, those sandworms look real. It looks great.
Yeah, the sandworm, yeah.
But that's almost a given nowadays, having cool effects. It's like, yeah, they have cool effects, but they just don't care about anything here, which is unfortunate. I was just bored. And the villains, especially, like, I mean, Baron Harkonnen is a caricature in the Lynch version. He's just floating around. It just looks awful. He has all this, like a plague on his face, just flesh hanging off of him. But it's charming. It's memorable. Meanwhile, Stellan Skarsgård is like 2 scenes in the new one. Dave Bautista plays the Sting character. He's in like 2 scenes and does nothing. Honestly, my 2 favorite characters in the film, the mother of Paul Atreides, Lady Jessica, who's played by Rebecca Ferguson, because there she feels like a real character, closer to the book. I think she's great in it. And the other one, it's the friend, the Duncan Idaho, who's played by Jason Momoa. And it's fun because it's Jason Momoa being himself. So he just comes on screen. He's like, "Hey, Timothée, come here, bro." Just a little fist bump. And they're like, "Oh, a character, life, oh, emotions, feelings." So, you know, like, I was reading all the tweets of hearing you talk about it. And I one of my professors from uni, I follow him on Twitter, and he was saying the same thing. Like, Dune looks so boring. I was like, well, you know, it kind of is. People are going insane for it. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know anything about cinema, I guess, because people are loving it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, obviously, I've only seen the trailers. I will be watching it this month, though, which was why there was some confusion over what I was writing my feature on.
Yeah.
I got 600 words into that, and I thought, oh, am I including the wrong film?
Is it the right one?
But yeah, I will be watching it, but I'm not holding my breath for it. I'm not excited. I'm watching it out of a duty to my job, not passion. And it's not because I don't like the cast. It's not because I don't like Villeneuve. I'm ambivalent at best on a lot of them. It just doesn't look like inspired. If you compare the vividity and the colors and the tone and the style of the Lynch feature and the stuff that I've seen of this one, it's night and day the difference. It's not a good difference. It's obviously the 80s standard is very different for sci-fi now that we've sort of breached into the future, but there is a timeless sense to some of that stuff, like Star Wars, like parts of David Lynch's Dune, that do, they still look good. And my worry with the upcoming one, which I think it's out on the 22nd over here. I know it's out in a lot of Europe, but Britain sort of severed itself from that, and ever since then we've suffered. But I think, so it comes out then, and it doesn't look like a film that's going to be memorable. I think, especially now that I'm starting to go back to the cinema. It's like 18 months since I've been. And we were talking about this before the podcast started. The sort of cinema culture, especially where I'm from, in like sort of the northern parts of England, it's non-existent. We have 2 chain cinemas which are showing James Bond and Paw Patrol the movie, and that's it. Which is a shame, because while that new James Bond film was very good and that Paw Patrol film was surprisingly all right, there's not much variety. 2 films and that's it from the cinema. And I'm not really inclined to see Dune at the cinema, to be honest. It's one of those films where I'll probably go to the cinema to see it because nobody in the north will want to see it and the screenings will be empty. But it's one of those films where it's like, I wouldn't mind waiting for it to come on Blu-ray. I wouldn't mind watching it at home. I wouldn't really give a shit. I don't care what Villeneuve says. Money's money at the end of the day. I'm giving him money either way by buying his shit film on Blu-ray and watching it in the fucking cinema. My issue with it, though, is that it's just, I don't enjoy the cinema. I feel like I'm going off on a tangent here. I just need to get this off of my
Go
chest
for
in a
it.
public
Go for it.
environment. So I went to No Time to Die. See it in the cinema. The first time I was been in the cinema since I saw the Will Ferrell adaptation of Force Majeure, which was a classic.
The memories.
Film. What was it called? Downhill. I do not miss the smell of the cinema. I do not miss the prices of their shit food. I do not miss people stealing the plastic straws and then forgetting they're in their pocket and sitting on them, rendering them useless. I don't miss the chairs that are really just awful to sit on. They're not small, they're just bad and they creak when you sit back. I don't miss the commute I have to take to get to a cinema. It's like, I think when I lived at university, it was 35 minutes on a train to get to the closest good cinema. Jesus. There was one that I lived, there was one literally up the hill from my first year accommodation. They showed Last Christmas for a year and a half. So it wasn't as if I was missing much. Now that I'm living elsewhere, to get to the cinema, it's either a bus ride for 40 minutes to spend, I'm not joking you, £35 to go and see a film, or I get a train, which is half an hour, and fair enough, it's a view, so it's £4.99, but they're not showing anything because there's nothing out in the northeast. No Titan because there's no audience for it. No Anthony Bourdain or Alex Ferguson documentaries because they were released in streaming. No Time to Die is the big release for the north of England, and that'll be it. June will have showcases, but it won't be shown much. It'll be one of those things where it's like it's on at 6 p.m. or 9 a.m. and that'll be it. And it's why I hit the cinema. It's just the ease of access for the cinema is not a possibility, not because they're far away, but because they're not showing anything. And that's been a problem even since before COVID. That's just something cinemas don't do up here. And it's because they're chains and they're obviously going to show what's popular, what's going to make them money. They're not going to show independent art house stuff. But even the independent art house cinema that I used to go to, one, it's shut down now, I think. And two, they did not show those in the first place because they knew that they would not make money. I think The 2 times I went to that cinema, I saw If Beale Street Could Talk and Rocket Man, because they weren't playing at the chain cinemas near me. And I spent I think £18 for my ticket to see Rocket Man, and that wasn't with food or drinks or anything. It's so expensive to see films, and it's why I prefer physical media, and it's why I prefer, you know, Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime, sort of stuff like that. I don't usually use Netflix that much, but when I do need it, it's there. It's very accessible. It's very quick, and it's just so much easier than watching like Dune on the big screen, where it's going to be like a solid 2 out of 5. I've spent 3 hours of my day just getting there, and then another 2 to get back after I watched the film. It's like the cinema for me is not just sort of, oh, I'll pop at the cinema. It's a literal, I have to take a day out to see it. It's
commitment.
It's rarely worth it. And it's why, especially because of COVID, with Rotterdam Film Festival, that was fantastic, because everything was just released. It was trickled through a streaming platform, and it was so easy. You could pause, I mean, I don't like to pause films when I watch them. When I sit down and watch them, I'm watching them. But it was nice to have the opportunity to go, all right, I'm going to watch this at this time and then this at that time, because I worked that around my university schedule. And it's just such a headache to go and see films that aren't even going to be that good. And it's difficult to make it a financially or even just physically sound decision, because there's so much. Like, you can see the shelves behind me. I know people listening can't. Well, I've got more than enough to crack through for the next few years. Why would I go and see something new? Because by the time I've cracked through all those, the new stuff that's coming out will be on physical release, and I can just get it from there. The only thing that makes me watch new films, and I don't know if you saw how many films I watched from 2020. I think it was 306. The only reason I do that is because most of them are relevant and people are talking about them. And if it were not for Clapper, and if it were not for Spark Sunderland and stuff that I write for, I just wouldn't watch many new releases, because most of them are shit, and most of them don't even play in the cinemas near me. So what's the point?
The burden of a film critic. That's honestly, might seem like a joke, but that's actually why I never really tried to be a film critic, because I did try watching all of the movies I could from one year. It was like, Jesus, there's so much garbage to go through. And I don't want to do that to myself.
I think I mean, I'm definitely a workaholic, and it was sort of presented to me rather than me acknowledging it. Where it was like, I don't know if you've seen my Letterboxd diary for like April through to September of last year, where it's like 4 films a day with reviews. And looking back on that, the actual reviews are not good. Not because I was working too much, but because my writing has improved since then. So it feels like all that time was just sort of, all right, now I need to watch those again, re-review them. But I'm very lucky that I do make a living from this now for a short period of time. Sort of that will end soon. But while I can do it, I'm trying to do as much as I can, and I've stretched myself too thin, and it doesn't help when I have to plan my day around what Villeneuve wants me to see and where at, because he doesn't want me watching his films on a particular screen size. I don't even own a TV in my room. I have 2 monitors. So watching on a TV is not going to be possible. I don't know how many inches this monitor is, but it's big enough for David Lynch's Dune. It's certainly big enough for Villeneuve's.
He'll make Dune. No, it's like, I don't know. I would say that of all the movies that one can watch on the big screen, this is almost the one you have to see on the big screen. But I honestly wouldn't say take the train. That's the thing. But I wouldn't say anyone has to see it on the big screen. I wouldn't say everyone has to see it as well.
If I lived somewhere like America or somewhere with good film culture, naturally I would go and see these films on the big screen. It's just a literal impossibility when none of the cinemas are showing the film. I remember wanting to see A Hidden Life on the big screen. And there was one screening of it, and it was 20 miles away. And I was considering it. It's like, that's just not... I absolutely love that film, but I wasn't going to spend what would have been essentially... I'll give a better example, actually. The French Dispatch is getting a special screen, and a day before it comes out, at the Tyneside Cinema, for me to watch that logically, I would have to book a hotel. I would have to stay in the city for the night, and then I'd have to pay for my ticket. I'd have to pay for food. It would probably cost me about £100 just to see the French Dispatch. And the issue there is, well, it's only an early screening. You can see it again afterwards. It's not showing anywhere after that. That's it. It's not showing in the chain cinemas. It's not showing in the independent cinemas. It's that screening, and that's it. So French Dispatch is very much an online thing for me. I'm going to have to see it on VOD, which is sort of becoming more consistent now, especially because of COVID. But I don't think it'll let up, because this was an issue, like I said earlier, this was an issue, especially for the Northeast before COVID, where I would want to see a film, but I would have to wait for it to come online. Stuff like The Lighthouse wouldn't get released here. Really big films that were nominated for Academy Awards were just not shown. I remember when I first moved to uni, the only films that were shown over like the Oscar period were Green Book and Bohemian Rhapsody. That was it. The rest of them had to be online screeners. It had to be sourcing them elsewhere. And it's a shame, because when 2 years down the line, it's out of the public eye, it's not discussed anymore, you get something like At Eternity's Gate on Netflix. And it's like, well, this would have been handy 2 years ago. And even then, streaming is just a whole new issue, because there's some films that get released in North American Netflix but don't in the UK for a long, long time. It's just such a mess, and it makes cinema viewing very difficult. And it's especially difficult because it's my job, which is even worse.
This is making me rethink all the times I've complained about my situation with going to the movies. The film's not being shown here. So I think this has never been that bad. Jesus.
And I think Jack would mention it as well. Northern cinema is just really difficult. It's like going to London for a festival is such a big commitment. And it's like, good grief. Even if London's in the same country, it's still like 4 hours on a train down there, arranging hotel rooms, it's arranging all this stuff. And I would love to do an in-person festival. It's just not something the North can offer. I know Glasgow did a festival, but it had no films, which is ironic. But
it is actually ironic. Jesus. Anyway, yeah. Skip Dune on the big screen time. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. And watch it on the phone. In spite of
telephone.
In spite of Villeneuve. It's like,
well, even going to the cinema, they don't print off your tickets physically anymore. I always keep my ticket. And it's such a small thing to be annoyed about, but I'm not having the last cinema ticket I own downhill. Not a chance. It's like downhill underwater. It's like, no.
Today I had my first physical ticket in over a year because usually I used to like book the tickets, and today it was very impromptu going to the cinema.
Yeah.
So I have an actual physical ticket, because for some reason, like the multiplex chain that's near me is owned by View. Like it's the same company. They ate it up some years ago, so it's part of View now. And for some reason, now that they started doing it before the pandemic a little bit, and now they're doing always. You have to buy the ticket for the movie at the bar of the cinema.
Yes, yeah, we have that here.
Which is why
I think, yeah.
You have all the booths at the entrance that were just lovely, where you could just queue up, get your ticket, and then maybe go to the bar. Meanwhile, now you have the bar where you get the tickets, and they give you a receipt. And it's horrible. I want the ticket. A receipt isn't a ticket. I want the ticket.
So the weird change that the View near me made was that you're no longer allowed to buy food over the counter. You have to use the ticket machine. So I've never used something so difficult in my life. It's like, I just wanted a plain hot dog. I don't like ketchup. I wanted to take the ketchup off. You're not allowed. You have to order the food, take the ticket, and then run to the counter and say, I don't want ketchup on this, please, no ketchup. Because they don't have an option for it, because it's been implemented so poorly. But if you're buying a hot dog at the cinema, then you've no right to complain. You're just part of it, £8. So, and I think that's another thing as well. It's like, the tickets are really cheap. Granted, it's $4.99 a film, which is really good.
It is a good
is that
deal.
it's variety. It's like, I remember summer 2019, me and my pal would always go to the cinema every Wednesday because it was 2 for 1 on her car insurance deal. So it'd be like £2.50 each. Great. The selection then even was, it was a lot of shit from like Men in Black International, Yesterday, stuff like that. It was really bad, but at least there was more on. And I don't know what the shift has been between. Is it because there's less coming out? Is it because the cinema chains are reevaluating what is financially viable for them to show?
Probably.
I have no idea. But what I do know is that it should not mean they're allowed to charge £8 for a hot dog. And it was not very big. It was like, you know, those tinned hot dogs you can get like 8 for £1. Like one of those in a dry bread bun. It's like, that was what I used to eat at my first year of uni. I would just have a tin of hot dogs for my tea. I felt like a student again, so that was nice. But I'm old and withered now, and I can't survive on hot dogs anymore.
Oh, that's a lovely note
To end
to end on the conversation.
Remember the days where I could eat
man.
hot dogs and nothing else.
Jesus. I blame Villeneuve for forcing people to go back to the cinema when they could have good hot dogs at home to watch his movie.
Exactly. Why do I have to go to the cinema? I've got everything I need at home. If I could just live, I bought a desk for my bed. Do you know why? Because when I wake up, the second I wake up, I can just start working. Incredible. I can just crack away at film.
Revolutionary.
The future is now. Also because the MacBook battery is that warm when it's streaming things, it burns my legs and I'm really concerned. So, desk. It's an old MacBook.
Well, now that it's colder, it's actually nice to have the battery in here. It's like, yeah, I'll touch it. Just warms me up a little bit. Keeps me warm during the winter.
Oh god, that's the benefits of building a computer, I suppose. It's under my desk like a little heat generator.
Keeps you company. Anyway, let's go to the closing segment of the best scene and character for book and film. Since we're on subject, let's go for Dune. Favorite character from the book, favorite character from the film, and favorite scenes, if there's any.
Oh god, that's a loaded set of questions there. I feel like the obvious answer is also the sort of best one to go with. I do like Paul Atreides, not for him as a character, but as kind of like what he represents, what his drive is, especially in the book. I think Herbert adapts what he signifies so incredibly well that it's hard to pick another character, because a lot of those characters kind of like thrown at the wall, see what sticks, and then the rest of them come together as kind of like a big clash of political and economic values. And Atreides is just at the heart of it. He's sort of the guiding torch between that all. I feel it's hard to step away from that because he's so integral to what Herbert was showing. And as far as best parts of the book go, it's the ending that I mentioned, where it's the realization of what he's done and that he's emperor now, and that there's no turning back, even though he needs to. I love that sort of ending. It's kind of the rejection of the superhero dynamic. It was Herbert said, if I had the tab open, I would have recited it word for word. It was something like, I'm breaking down this hero stereotype and the archetype of it, but you are merely participating in it. Something incredible like that, and it was very profound, but I've just butchered it there, rightly so. As far as the scenes in the film go, I couldn't point a finger at one of them. I do think it's sort of I have a soft spot for Patrick Stewart, who's got like long-ish hair, but you can tell he's bald. As far
it's interesting hair and makeup for him.
It's really odd, yeah. But I don't think there's a specific scene. I do like some of the really, I don't know what scene it is, but there's like a really intense close-up of like a needle, and it's like just spinning, and there's narration over it. It's like, oh, we must do this now. It feels very claustrophobic. But I think the style and the visualization of Lynch's adaptation, while strong, is troubled, and it's expected though. I don't think that's anything we can hold against Lynch, because he's given it a really good crack. And a lot of that comes through positively. I'd say he does good with what he has, because there is no way you can cram Dune down into just 2 hours. But he tries, and I have a lot of respect for him for that.
Yeah. And I don't agree. Like, I know some people who say that he should go back and give us his definitive version and re-edit it. I'm like, no, just don't let me go there.
Let that sleeping dog lie.
Truly, it's very heartbreaking. In his book, Room to Dream, that's the name of the autobiography, he talks about Dune, of course, and it's very heartbreaking because he says something along the lines of, when you make a movie you believe in and people don't like it and it gets destroyed, you die once. When you make a movie you don't believe in and it gets destroyed, you die twice. And with Dune, he died twice. Oh, yeah.
That's heartbreaking. Jesus.
But with Fire Walk With Me, he died once. Just really, I was like, oh no, someone give him a hug. Poor man.
I feel bad for the guy.
Yeah. So I actually pretty much agree with everything you said. I do really like Lady Jessica in the book, probably because I'm projecting the idea, because I read it after watching the new version, and I was picturing it with Rebecca Ferguson in mind. I was like, yeah, okay, I can see that better. But she's an interesting character who just kind of vanishes in the film. Like, after she gives, there's like this montage that skips a lot of things. I was like, things happen, the sister is born, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, I don't know, okay. But I do like that character. Because of the mother figure is also very protective. We didn't talk about the voice, that whole thing of like mind controlling people, which is neat. It's implemented in an odd way in the movie. The Villeneuve version definitely has better action scenes as well. I'll give him that. It's not, especially when they're having the sword fights with the shield around them. That looks almost like Tron, and not in a good way. It looks like Tron. But yeah. Anyway, I do like Lady Jessica. I do agree with you. The ending ties everything together, which is something that doesn't work in the adaptation. But it works so well in that, especially knowing that there's sequels where you see the aftermath of everything that happened with Atreides, and just another uprising and people going against him, where he becomes a new emperor that has to be overthrown. It's the tragic nature of politics, just an endless cycle.
And I think it's a shame that none of the adaptations so far have had the time to understand that.
Oh, maybe part 2 of the Villeneuve one. Who knows? I don't know.
We both know.
I almost hope they don't make it. I don't know. I find it funnier to have people think, to have people like have the ending of the first one be just him going off in the desert with the Fremen, whatever. It's kind of like, okay, that's such an odd choice. Yeah, and if someone is going into the movie wanting Zendaya, you're gonna be so disappointed. I remember reading an interview with her before watching the movie where she was like, even though I spent 4 days on the set, I had a lovely time making it. I was like, oh, she's not gonna be in the film, is she? He's like, yep. You know that like he has visions of the Fremen in the Lynch version. In the Villeneuve one, he has visions from the first scene. It opens with it's very streamlined in an effective way in that sense. But he has visions of the Fremen, and this shows the same shot of Zendaya like 10 times throughout the entire film until he actually meets her at the end. And I'm like, imagine being a Zendaya fan, just getting one shot.
Does she have any fans after Malcolm and Marie?
Yes. I was scared. I was just, when they were having the press screening for Dune, fans gathered outside of the press room. I was hearing those screams from like 500 meters away. They're
That's
like,
worrying. I mean,
Hundreds of people just whoosh together.
She's definitely a talent. I just haven't seen anything with real heart or soul from any of her projects yet. It's like Space Jam 2, Spider-Man, Dune.
This is not going to change much for you, then. Not even The Greatest Showman.
Oh, yeah, she was in Greatest Showman. She was in Super Buddies, but that was direct to DVD, I'm afraid, because the Buddies anthology still marches on.
Jesus. For the scene, I do love the riding sandworm scene. That's where the film comes together for me.
It comes together, does it?
Yeah, I mean, it also has Everett McGill. That's when he plays a bigger part, and I do love the guy a lot. Yeah. So just him and Kyle on the thing, and like you mentioned, like I do like Paul Atreides in this one. He feels like a real character in the film because of the actor. I think, even though it was one of his first roles, Kyle MacLachlan is great as always. Not the greatest performance in this, but when he's smiling and doing the things, like I'd follow him.
Yeah,
I wouldn't follow Timothée.
He's such a likable presence.
He is.
Not just in the film, but just in the real world. And I think that's infectious, especially for Dune. It's like the guy's having a really good time. It's a big project for him.
Yeah.
He crops up in the strangest projects, and I love that about him.
The Tesla biopic, not really biopic.
What the fuck was that film?
Like there's some films that come out, they just look back on them and they think, was that even a real movie? Did it just invent it?
Ethan Hawke and Kyle MacLachlan stabbing each other with ice cream cones does not feel real, but it certainly happened. I wonder how many people actually saw that film.
Not many. I know I'm one of them.
Yeah, you and Jack are 3 of them. That makes them a decent percentile. We're like 20% of this audience.
I don't think neither of us loved it in any way.
I think Jack liked it, but I did not. I hated it. I thought, Jim Gaffigan being in any film was sort of just off-putting at best.
I should have been more fun for how anachronistic it was. Yeah. But anyway, Tesla, enough about Tesla. Let's move on to It. The It book and It chapter 1 and 2, and you're free to do whatever you want with the movies. Just one movie, just both movies. We do, yes. Them's the rules.
I think for the book, I think it'll be what's his name? That doesn't narrow it down.
The name of It.
No. The big climax at the end, I really like. The actual final fight against It. I think that's so well developed, and the fluttering between past and present and all the values that these characters hold dear. I was a bit cautious about the build-up, but it's deserving, and the payoff makes sure of that. And I really like that. I thought it was fantastic for the book. For the film, not so much. I think the strongest part of the film is either the very brief scenes between Beverly and her father in the first one, or actually that's it. I was trying my absolute best to think of something good about the second film. I don't have it in my heart to say anything good about it, because rewatching it was just fucking atrocious. It's just jump scare here, character arc there. It's all the same all the way through. I suppose the King cameo's okay. I do like the bit where Pennywise descends from the heavens with a pot of balloons to Bill Hader, and all he really does is mock him, and that's it.
That's it. It's like, yeah.
It's fucking fantastic.
Yeah.
But yes,
it's, you don't like the Henry Bowers scene where he just pops up in the bathroom and then he just leaves.
It's a classic, obviously.
It's okay. I was thinking, like, I was rewatching it, and there's the moment, like, he breaks out of the asylum, whatever, and he gets in the car with the corpse of the friend. I'm just kind of this could be like a Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas retelling. It's just the two of them coming to Vegas, him and the corpse friend. I'd watch that.
So more. It would be so much better. It would be far more preferable as well. But it was not to be.
Well, for me, in the book, I do like as a character, the whole group is fascinating, but I do like Bill in a way. I'm like, you know what?
Yeah,
Because he has the constant. He is the self-insert of Stephen King because he needs to have a writer in there um, talking about stories and the importance of storytelling. But it's effective, and the fact that the inciting incident is the disappearance of Georgie in the book, which I just still think it's maybe it's the classic scene. That's what I think of the most in the book. Not just because of how important the iconography is for the movies as well, but just in itself, it works really well. The balancing tone of horror and light humor, it works. It's a great scene.
It does.
In the movies, like Chapter 1, I do really love Beverly. I think Sophia Lillis does a terrific job playing her. And I agree with you, like the scenes between her and her father are the best ones because it's real horror, like the horror of abuse, the horror of domestic violence, of horrible things that happen between fathers and children. And it's unfortunate that feeling of the cycle of abuse repeating itself is absent from Chapter 2. That's unfortunate. But I love the bloody bathroom scene where she's just looking into the sink and everything fills up with blood and the father just comes in and he doesn't notice or see the blood. Because it's just one of those visuals that just sticks in your mind. But to be positive about it, Chapter 2, I do like it's a bit of a cheat, but the Richie and Eddie combo, I do like that one because it's like
a nice dynamic. Yeah,
they change it from the book because in the book they never outright say that Richie was gay. They never say that explicitly. Let's say it's implied in a way, but in the movie they take the subtext and make it text. And it's all right. Like Bill Hader does a good enough job, as we mentioned. Is one of the highlights of the film.
Yeah, he's the crowning achievement of that film is that he is unfazed by the shit around him. He is not paying attention at all, and he gives a great performance.
Yeah, and even James Ransone, in a way, it works with Bill Hader. Like the two of them together really work. And the last moment where he's just carving the letters again in the woods, like, oh, it's cute. It's just like that's good. But as far as scenes go, like there's not many good scenes in that. We did mention the opening that's rather effective on its own. I don't like that we get another Georgie scene with the little girl because it's like why
because the past replicates the future, my friend.
But they could make that the opening scene then.
Exactly, yeah.
Just don't put it at like the 50-minute mark for a girl we barely saw in the opening scene. Anyway, one of the best scenes that always stands out to me when I think about this movie is when they defeat Pennywise by just screaming at him. You're a clown. You're a mimic. You're a fucking clown. You're an elderly lady. And he just becomes a puddle. He's like, oh, I'm little.
I'm little.
Just, I don't know. It's just those, like, for some reason, those things, they don't really necessarily creep me out, but they just stand out in my mind so much. Where you have, like, the baby adult. I would say Eli Roth, a director that I also not unintentionally met at Venice because he went over us in the line, like he cut in line in front of me and a friend. We were going to the Last Night in Soho premiere and he cut in front of us. Like, what a fucking asshole. And the elderly Italian lady screamed at him for not respecting the queue, which was nice. No, but yes, he deserves it. But anyway,
absolutely.
Honestly, if I already disliked Eli Roth enough, now I have a real life reason for disliking him. But I have to thank him.
Why?
I have to thank him for making one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen in a film, which is Jack Black's head on a baby's body in the house with the clock on its walls. And just those images just stick with me.
I avoided that film on purpose.
Just watch this clip. Just look for baby Jack Black. It's like a baby, but with the head of Jack Black.
I will not be watching that.
It's just that's what I was thinking about during this scene. I was kind of like, yeah, it's like baby Jack Black, just little Pennywise, just crying, and they cut his heart out. That's when it goes full Stephen King, and that's when it doesn't work. But in a weird way, it works. And I would say, just closing remark: Mike Flanagan knows how to adapt Stephen King because he knows what's utter bullshit that's never going to work in a film and needs to be cut. He wouldn't have put that in the movie if he directed it.
He would have gutted it.
Jesus. Anyway, both It and Dune, as books and as films, can be found rather easily everywhere, to rent, to buy, libraries, all the sequels, all the new versions, re-editions. Like, you're gonna read them and find them rather easily. I think they're streaming. I know that It Chapter 2 is streaming on Netflix Canada. If anyone's from Canada and wants to rewatch it for some reason, to hurt themselves a bit. But yeah, thank you for listening to this episode. It was a lovely good time, lovely good chat. Next week we are releasing the Stephen King special, where we'll be talking about the man himself. The good Jakob Flash will be joining us for that discussion. And next month we are going to be talking about, again, two odd choices of books, which are Red Dragon and Great Expectations.
Oh shit, yeah, I've accidentally read both of those already.
Accidentally.
I genuinely, I finished Red Dragon a few days ago. I was like, I was reading this for some reason. What was it? It's like, I see.
Now there's a reason. I honestly, weird thing, and we'll close the episode, but I've read Silence of the Lambs years before watching the movie. And now I'm reading Red Dragon without having seen the new remake. I've already seen Manhunter though, but we'll get into it next month.
God, we've got to watch the bloody
Brett Ratner. Brett Ratner, I think, made it. So yeah, we have to. Anyway,
why didn't we pick better books?
It's like, oh yeah, we can talk about It. It's a good book. Oh no, you have to rewatch It Chapter 2.
I've got to watch the Ethan Hawke Great Expectations.
Oh Jesus, there's so many of those to actually watch. We'll pick just one or two.
At least it's got Pulp on the soundtrack.
Anyway, where can people find you, Ewan?
They can find me on Letterboxd at Ewan Gledo, EWANGLEADOW, and Twitter as well at Ewan Gledo with that same spelling, because apparently my name is very difficult to spell. I should know, the postman thinks so. And you can find my writing on Cult Following, Clapper, Geek Show, Sparks Sunderland, which is the new thing I'm working on for the next year. And that's it, I think. Yeah. I've got too many places that I've written for that I just forget. And it's like, I'm so sorry to snub you, but there's no time.
Your presence is above and beyond everywhere now.
I've stretched myself far and thin. And
it's like an octopus. It's like Spectre. It's everywhere. Well, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at NikiBear97 and on Letterboxd at Nicolo Grasso. You can watch my videos, my short films on YouTube and Vimeo at Enjoy the Movies. You can read both of our stuff on Clapper, as you mentioned. You can listen to Clappercast and Uncut Gems podcasts, also Clapper podcasts that are very fun, so I highly recommend those. You can subscribe to Patreon to, support Clapper and get some good extra bonus episodes every month. Just a lot of bang for your buck, just $2 a month. And you can also follow us as the podcast on Instagram and Twitter. Instagram, Death by Adaptation Pod. Twitter, only Death Adaptation. So you can follow us there, stay in touch, keep in track on everything, tell us what you think of the show. You can even email us if you want at deathbyadaptationpod@gmail.com. all the angry emails about Eraserhead aimed at Ewan.
Yeah, Nick fields the emails. I'm too busy dampening the fire of the ABBA consequences, which are still a week later ongoing.
Jesus, that's commitment again. That's like
they feral beasts, these mid-50-year-olds. Should be stopped.
Oh man. Well, thank you very, very much for listening, and we'll see you very soon. Bye bye.
Can't see me waving, can they?